Good morning. We are in the conclusion, reviewing the conclusion of Ayin Beis. We are on at the bottom of page 1430. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 1431. We already moved to 1331. Okay. Discussing a Biyuri Azayar from the Tzemach Tzedek, which is based on a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, of the words he used, Ad heichen magia hu magia, Allah's man. To where does it reach? Our efforts below, our work below. We know that God wants, even in the highest levels, for us to do Avodah. That's not the question. The question is, where does it actually reach in the dynamics of Seder Ishtalshalos? Where does Avodah actually touch, so to speak? What does it trigger? Where does it generate, and so on? So, of course, it gives Nachas Ruach to Atzmos. However you explain that. Because we know on Yesham Leishanisi, there's no change, and even beyond that. But in this Seder Ishtalshalos, what we've been learning, that it reaches till Malchus. Malchus is the place where that interaction between Elokus and existence takes place. And that's also where the Malachim begin their work of processing. Remember, they're processors between Atzilus and Biy'a. They're not Atzilus, in Biy'a, like the cosmic digestive system. Homu me'ai loi. So they are essentially the processors, distributors. So that is the essence of what we're learning here. And what's the connection, of course, is because we're talking about how neshama is down below, how they work, do their work, and they slowly, through the stepping stones of Seder Ishtalshalos, elevate existence and themselves to higher and higher levels. Ultimately, through the Avodah, neshama will reach all the way to the highest source because it's rooted higher than everything, even higher than Torah. But it doesn't begin that way. It begins with our work, our hard work down below, step by step as we grow, mutfa, murgish, muskel, from children into adolescents, into teenagers, into adults, and continue that journey in connecting to higher states of divine consciousness, as we've been learning here. So it's the tzimtzumim that conceal that divine flow, and our job is to, as I said, to climb that ladder and reconnect, which is the whole purpose of Shema Hashem Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, to connect, to unite existence, a fragmented and diverse existence, to the divine unity, like we learn Hamayrik Be'echad, when we extend our contemplation from existence, we travel toward understanding that it's all God's speech, and from speech to thought, all the way to before the Tzimtzum, as we learned. That's the process, but nevertheless, it is a process. So we're right now in the middle of that discussion, Homo Me'alei, as he said. Just a second, Homo Me'alei, Rachama Rachmenu. These ideas of Midas, the Midas L'mayla, that the Midas L'mayla are initially, like we learned, God does not have emotions that are affected by anything. So first he spoke about the Midas as God's capacities, his capacity. Like he said, he has the ability to do chesed and gvura and teferes rachamim. And then there's levels in Elokus, in Atzilus, there's already hispilus in the sense that there's a feeling, there's a tangible feeling, but still not impact. We don't impact Atzilus, but where's their impact? That's in Malchus. That's what we began learning at the bottom of 1428 and continue. That's where there's actual shinui. Now we still have to understand how that affects higher levels, but that we haven't gotten to. So what have we learned so far? Is that Atzilus is a memutza, is an interface between that which is higher than Atzilus, and Biy'a. So on one hand, Atzilus is closer to Biy'a, but it's still not Biy'a. It's still relative, even though there are spheres there, and the spheres already have a structure. Like he compared it, as we learned in the previous class, the structure of the 10 spheres, and they're a mocker for Biy'a, whereas higher than Atzilus, you can't even call it a mocker, chesed of Atik, and he compared it to the kav That's like a tzinner, a channel, that from that channel come smaller channels that channel the energy to each part of the cosmic order, but it's still higher than Biy'a. Amnam kol zeo shabatzilus gufa. So zom is mides from the word medida. It measures the flow and regulates the flow. But compared to Biy'a, it's still a state of Ein Sof, as we discussed in the previous class. So there's Esser spheres, there's Bli Ma, without substance, and She'en Lem Sof. Whereas Chesed and the emotions of Atzilus of Biy'a, are midah v'gvul, are limited, and nivra bal gvul, and ein arech klal legab b'chinas Chesed Atzilus, and ein arech, and altogether infinitely distant, and apart from Chesed of Atzilus. Compared to Avram Avinu, Anochi Ofer ve'efer, Avram in Biy'a is only like Ofer ve'efer, is completely distant, ein arech to Chesed of Atzilus, and that's the split, psik taima, the partition, the line that separates between Avram, that's the parsa, the pareches, which is the level of Malchus that separates between Atzilus and that which is below Atzilus. That's where we stopped. So we have here is a good understanding of how existence can exist. Just like the Tzimtzum Arishan in general conceal the infinite divine in order for us to be able to exist. So on lower levels, Malchus of Atzilus here serves as a type of partition that allows the flow from the divine infinite 10 spheres that are in a state of infinity compared to Biy'a to come into a defined structure. That's, of course, ultimately leads to Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, where we exist. And then our job is to retrace these steps and reconnect. But he's continuing to discuss this process, and that is an explanation all to understand how our halas man, how our work below affects above and actually creates a shinui where in the potter's wheel, in the wheel that God turns, which manages and regulates all of existence, as we learned, but it's our actions that define how that wheel will be turned, as we learned earlier from the Zohar that is being explained here. Okay. So we'll continue from around halfway down page 1431. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Okay. So the line where I'm starting is Ben HaKodesh Ben Kodesh HaKadoshim, which was a quote from the Pardes that talks about the pareches, the partition, the curtain that regulates the flow and separates between Hatzilus and everything below it. Then he continues, V'gam inyan hahelem. So we just said this curtain is a form of concealment, like a curtain, like you put a curtain on a window. What it does is it blocks out some of the light from coming in, at least diffuses it. So the same thing in this context, the curtain is a partition. So he says now like this, V'gam inyan hahelem. Also this helem that the curtain creates, hu shemesalim ha'er b'chinas elyeinu shebemalchus. This helem is not just happening in the lower levels, that is the level of Mr. Oyer, the energy is concealed in the higher level of Malchus. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the Malchus has beis madregas. Malchus has two levels, b'chinas yam u'b'chinas eretz. One is called like water, like the sea, yam, and b'chinas eretz, land. So sometimes you'll see yam is Malchus refers to a yam, and sometimes it's referred to land. The yam b'chinas helem, like the sea that conceals everything within the sea, that's a state of helem. Which means that the energies that flow into Malchus get concealed within it. Umasha Malchus me'ira, and that when Malchus shines, it's only the outer dimension. Like we learned at length earlier, that Malchus is like the moon. It has nothing of its own. So when the moon reflects the sun, it's not reflecting the entire sun. Most of it gets concealed. And then only the outer dimension is reflected, and that's what we see when we look at moonlight. So the same thing in Ruchnius, Malchus is not just a channel, it's also a concealer to make sure that the light can enter into Biy'a. So that's what he's adding here. So even though he said this Helam is Salam, he's saying that the Helam is happening at the higher level of Malchus. What we get is only an external part. So in a sense, there's really two steps here. One is that Malchus even the higher level of Malchus is already concealing. And then there's the lower level of Malchus, not just as concealing, it's only giving us the outer dimension of it all. We know Malchus is both a makabel and a mashpia. So Malchus on one hand receives the energies from above like the moon, but then it's mashpia. The moon is also called a moir, the small luminary, because it also shines light. So it has both elements. We learned this earlier on the bottom of page 1350 and 1357, that we say, the word expression we say, Amuna kol zeis, that's Lashon Nukva. Amuna kol zeis, not kol zeh, Amuna. It's a feminine, because the feminine is Makabel. But the end of the statement, it says, V'kayim aleinu, not V'kayemes aleinu. That's Lashon Zohar, Lashon Tchar. So how do you explain that? Because there's two aspects. First, Malchus serves as a Makabel, like a student that receives from its teacher. And then Malchus in turn becomes a mashpia that transmits to the next level of students, so to speak, a lower level. And in this case, usually we think of mashpia as being a higher level. But here the makabel is higher, because first Malchus receives from higher levels, and then it's mashpia. So it's higher than the mashpia. The b'chinas makabel, b'chinas pnimius ha-Malchus. Makabel is pnimius ha-Malchus, the inner dimension of Malchus, what he called Yam before, the sea. V'hu b'chinas etzem mahusa, she b'chinas makabel. And that's the very essence of Malchus, the very core personality of Malchus, that it's a makabel. Commotion is bar le'il, like we learned earlier, page 1355. We spoke about Malchus being fundamentally a makabel. And how does it makabel? It's like a yam, like a sea. All the rivers run to the sea. The test. What is that referring to? The rivers are referring to all the energies of the higher 9 spheres, higher than Malchus. Malchus. Like the rivers that flow to the sea, they all drawn and they all channel into Malchus. So Malchus is receiving all of that, but in a form of concealment. Vareheim mis'almin ba. And as they flow into Malchus, they become concealed within it, like we just learned. Being that Malchus is fundamentally a concealer. That's the idea of the moon not having any light of its own or anything of its own. It's not a Gilead, it's all in a state of Helam. Commission is bar le'il, like we learned there, the same pages I just referred to. Commission kosher b'malkam achad. V'al kain, he malemes es ha'eres ha'nimshachim bo. So being such, Malchus conceals the energies that flow within it. V'achar kach hi mashpia. Then comes stage 2, where Malchus then turns its attention downward, so to speak, to be mashpia to the next level of Biy'a. Masha mekabelas milmaila. That which would receive from above, Malchus is now, after it's filtered it and channeled it and concealed it, it now, what it received from above, now it transmits below, obviously in a far more diminished fashion. Aval ein ze mahusa klal, but it's not the very personality of the that is in Atzilus, that Malchus received. It's only a reflection of a reflection. So essentially, Malchus serves as a pareiches, like you said, a partition, but now he's elaborating more, that partition in turn conceals everything that goes in it, and what it gives off is only an outer dimension, a reflection of a reflection. Now, why is he elaborating so much? Because Malchus is the level where our Meisa Tachtenim interact with. Because Malchus is that perfect in-between, that on one hand, it's a bridge from Atzilus into Biy'a. Now, this Malchus in microcosm, also in macrocosm, he doesn't say it here, but elsewhere he speaks about Malchus of Ein Sof, Malchus of Atzilus the Klolos, in microcosm before the Tzimtzum, which is connected to the 10 hidden spheres where God envisioned existence. So all this is the place where it's critical, because if you don't have Malchus, basically there'll be a breakdown between the integration of the divine and existence, because you don't have that bridge. And to use a simple example, think of a circuit breaker or any other regulator, even in electricity or in our appliances. If that switch breaks or is bypassed, the two will not meet. The electricity will either blow out the circuit or it just won't flow properly within it. So you need a perfect balance. And we see this also in the human body and in nature. The perfect balance of true interfaces is they make sure there's an exactly amount of energy that needs to be transmitted. They regulate that, not more and not less. And that's a critical piece in this whole process of integrating the two. So this is what Malchus serves. That means that for Malchus, the energy of Atzilus, the Oyer, comes in such a manner. So now it's been diffused enough and diminished enough that it can become a source for the creations of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, the next level. But then there's one more step in this process. So you can literally see here, if you want, you can call it cosmic engineering. Just like an engineer builds any circuit. So they're building it, everything has to be perfectly the gauges and the levers and the regulators have to be perfect. So there's yet another thing in Malchus, which we learned earlier, and he's referring to it now, that Malchus itself is mislabish. If you remember, he said that for Malchus to be able to be Ma'aseh is bechinas islapshus and what? In matat, in the malachim. So that's the next step. Now he's calling it nal. Nal is like a sandal, a shoe, which is actually the name of matat. One of the names of the malach is called nal. In order to really make sure that it's actually defined and finite. So you have one more so-called gatekeeper called the Slapshus of Malchus to make sure that the flow is exactly limited. I like to find an example. I remember once reading, literally I'm talking about physical engineering, that whenever you have these gauges and levers, they're always going to have a stop check. What do they call it? There's a word for it. That's an additional measure to make sure that the flow is exactly right. So you don't just rely on just the regular regulators and levers and filters, but you have an additional filter that ensures that it should really be properly tailored to the recipient. So that's this additional point. The now, what he calls the now, because we know from between the Eretz and the Rakia is Chamesh Me'ah Shana, the Gemara says. It's a journey of 500 years. We're talking there spiritually, because it's a big gap when you talk about heaven and earth. And Malchus is basically bringing from heaven to earth. So therefore, to make sure that it really is defined And in the parameters of existence, you have this additional measure. In the Maimer that actually talks about Mayofa, how beautiful are the are your footsteps in your shoes. So Chassidus explains L'Kutei Torah. He referred to the same L'Kutei Torah at the bottom of 1428. That nalayim is the shoes, is the footsteps that regulates that the flow be exactly appropriate. Like when a person walks on the ground itself can be rough and could have dangerous elements. So the shoe is like a filter. Shoes serves as a buffer between the leg, the foot, and the ground. So that's what the Ruchnius is the level of Malchus as it comes down b'Islapshus. So you see here a bunch of steps in Malchus, as Malchus serves the role of bridging, interfacing between Atzilus and Biy'a. However, we have to keep in mind that as much as it's concealing, it also is serving as the sustainer. Basically, the energy is flowing through Malchus. Malchus is not a complete stopgap where it all stops. Malchus is a filter more than anything else, but it doesn't stop it. And nevertheless, Malchus, being this state of concealment, because that's what Malchus is, fundamentally a state of concealment, unlike all the spheres, which they are fundamentally a gilui. Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, they are all manifest in gilui. Even though they all have their own structures, but Malchus is identified. Malchus is the opposite. It's fundamentally a concealed state. For many reasons, but one of the reasons, like we discussed here, and that's where the parentheses should end. And as a result of that, Malchus is the perfect entity to serve as the source to create and sustain Biy'a. So one example given for this is the king. Malchus is like a king. A king has many faculties. He has intelligence, Chachma, Bina, Das. He has midas and emotions. He has a whole personality. But as he rules his kingdom, what is the main focus? Is governing his subjects. They will see a certain element of wisdom and empathy and feelings that he employs, but they don't see the full, how he is in his full privacy of his own domain. That will only be exposed to his own family or to his own close ministers. But the subjects will only see the outer dimension of how the king rules. So Ruchnius, that's what Malchus serves, is like, on one hand, is the ruler of Biy'a, like the governing force in this case. But on the other hand, most of what Malchus has from the higher spheres remains concealed within it. So it's a perfect example, a perfect place to be that bridge. Now, when you talk about someone who's not a king, let's say a teacher, or someone even closer, a friend, you don't call them Malchus. They're not governing you. They may be your partner. They may be your teacher. They're closer to you. So Malchus, on one hand, there's a certain element of distance, Helam. On the other hand, an element of closeness, because he is governing and he is ruling. So that's Malchus. Okay, let me stop here if there are any questions. Because there's more, he wants to explain more about this, because another key point to remember is that Malchus is not being mashpia its own energy. It's being mashpia that which comes from higher than it, which is going to be vital in understanding how Maisa Tachtenim works through Malchus, through that wheel, through the potter's wheel, and it connects to higher levels. Because at the end of the day, again, Malchus is channeling the energy from above it. It is not generating it. However, it channels it in the proper way, where there's the proper measure of concealment that allows for the next step to emerge. But let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
That was actually my question. So, we started the class, and where we are in the Hemshech is explaining how, where does our avoda reach, halasman, like when it reaches, he's explaining, reaches to Malchus, but then most of what you just read is about how it's megale, or, and how it's mitzamtzem from above, the hamshachim from above to below, and how it transmits or through it from above to below to the angels, matat, now. So it seems, and like you just said, the ore that it's transmitting from above to below is not the same as the ore that's been elevated through
So
our avoda.
okay. So let's learn it. Fine. I mean, if you're going to ask what I just said, that's good. That's great.
Well, I'm gonna ask, why does he spend all this time explaining the function of Malchus when in respect of Gilui, when that's not really the topic on the Shaila that he asked.
What Shaila did he ask? What question is on the table now?
Where does our avoda reach? Halasman.
Okay, so he's being very thorough in explaining how Malchus works, because on one hand, Malchus is where the shinui takes place. Higher than Malchus, there's no shinui. So we have to understand Malchus well. The more you understand Malchus, the more we'll understand the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of aspects to it.
Could it be that?
Okay, so continuing on then. And the fundamental hamshacha itself, like we talk about moonlight, the moon doesn't generate its own light. It's ultimately a reflection of the sun. It's going through the moon, and it's a metamorphosis. In other words, it's been transformed into moonlight, but it's not coming from itself. So hamshacha be'etzem, the hamshacha itself, himilmayla mebchinas malchus, is higher. It comes from higher than malchus. It's coming from the higher spheres. Sharisira lesla megama klum. Like we said, the seer of the moon has nothing of its own. So it's not Malchus that's transmitting anything. It's all coming, it's channeling something higher than Malchus. It has nothing of its own, it only receives from the higher spheres. Now you may recall, when he spoke about Les Lamagam Klum earlier, on the pages I referred to, page 1355 and so and on, he said Les Lamagam Klum has two interpretations. One, it doesn't have anything from its own, it receives from this higher spheres. But the second interpretation has nothing of its own, it's generated from our Veda below. And he explained both aspects. So it's very relevant to what we're going to be learning now. So he says like this now. So then why don't the higher spheres just transmit their energy directly into Biy'a? Because the air from the higher spheres, they're too intense, they're too beyond the Nevraim, for the Nevraim, the creations, to be able to contain them. Like we learned before, Atzilus is still Ein Sof. Even if it's Chesed and Gvura, it's Chesed, like I explained, one of the explanations, Ein Sof of Chesed. And we're dealing with a world of Bal Gvul that is finite with defined parameters. However, the way those spheres are concealed and channeled in a concealed way through the parecha, through the curtain, and the concealments of Malchus that we just learned before. And what transmits is only a reflection of those 9 higher spheres. That comes after the concealment. Then it becomes be'erech, it's now become commensurate with the creation. It's gone through that concealed channel. Liyas b'chinas mokalahem, in order for it to be a source for them. So now we can call it a mokar, because there's a direct relationship, because it's channeled it and concealed it. And because Malchus is the source for the creations of Biy'a, l'chein kol halos man shal nivroim magia adam Malchus. And now he's taking us back to the beginning of the point that he started on the new paragraph on the previous page 1430. That's where the halos man, our work, relates to Malchus, reaches Malchus, magia adam Malchus, v'loy l'mayla ma Malchus, and not higher than Malchus. Being that which is higher is not be'erech. they're not commensurate. There's nothing in common between them. In relationship, in context of a relationship. Ki ad bechinas Malchus levad. It's only till Malchus, as he explained. So this does not mean that there's no connection with higher levels, as we're going to learn. But if you're talking about a relationship where one thing impacts the other, Malchus is so-called that station that God created. That's where we directly interact. So it'd be similar to a king who appoints his ministers, or the king, if you wish, when he's in a place where he's interacting with the people, then you have an interaction with him. But when he's on his own in his inner sanctum, then he's removed. That's when we don't have an interaction with him, and that's not where shinui happens, the shinui that is affected by our avodah. Now he's going to still continue to explain the next step. So what does happen when we do the halas man? Our avodah, does anything happen higher than Malchus? Or is it completely oblivious? He didn't say it's oblivious. He just said that's where it reaches. No, that's where the action takes. That's the potter's wheel, that the wheel that God turns to the right and to the left, as we learned from the Zohar, that regulates the flow. But we're going to learn now in the next section, we're going to learn, the next paragraph, we're going to learn, obviously, what that does to higher levels. And all this is from that Biyuri HaZohar. And of course, this is also vital. One more point I should make. If you remember the example, the operative example, which we're going to get back to soon, is between the eyesight. That one of the levels of Era Makabel is the moon. Another was luminous stone, and the third was eyesight. Eyesight is the real main focus, that the eye has two dimensions to it. The way the soul comes down below is like the eyesight that manifests within the keli, the eye vessel, where there it sees, but it has limitation. It can't see on its own. It needs outside light, the siyua of the Eine Ha'eda and the Teira Eir and so on to illuminate. And then there's the eye, the power of vision, and the Etzema Nefesh, where there are no limitations. But that's the neshama as it is in its source. So the Aveda that we do is obviously, we have to think of it in context where we live Eris and Kalim, the eyesight within the Kalim, where there are the limitations that we're talking about. And that's vital. If a person was able to access immediately the eye as it is in Etzema Nefesh, first of all, we wouldn't be able to integrate it. Think of like looking at the sun without any filters. So the filters are critical. In this case, Malchus is critical. The Maisa Tachtenim that we do relates to a level that relates to us. So there's something commensurate. Like the eye, the power of the vision that enters into the physical eye is limited. It's not the power of vision as it's in the Estem HaKayach, unlimited. And that allows us to expand our containers and expand our consciousness to be able to receive more and more from higher levels. So ultimately the goal is not to stop at Malchus, is to reach higher levels. But you need Malchus because we cannot contain those higher levels without Malchus's filter and partitions, as we've been learning here. So all this is going to come back to explain how the neshamas below must have Torah and must have leaders and must have the malachim who help process the digestive system, cosmic digestive system, and all the other siyua that we need to be able to be mamshich Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that unity into our existence, and ultimately reach higher levels of unity that are beyond our existence, and all the way to the third level, which connects Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata. That's only possible if we are intact and we're able to contain. It's like there's no way you're going to reach the highest level of the teacher's wisdom if you don't first start with Aleph Beis and first learn on your level. First, you have to integrate it on your level, spoon feed it. Then you can grow and expand to be able to reach and connect to higher levels of divine energy, all the way to the highest levels. So this is the process critical in the whole system for neshamas to be able to really achieve what they have to achieve. So the neshama is in full intensity and full power, though it's embedded within us, but it's not shining forth. That's why the neshama has to contend with an animal soul and has a battle. If the neshama, as it is lamayla, would be as it is lamata, there'd be no battle altogether. It would be pure lakus. It would be like Erein Sof before the Tzimtzum, that doesn't leave room for another existence. So there'd be no room for anything else. Here we're talking about that there's a tzimtzum and now there's a Malchus, which is critical also. If you go back to volume 2, when he asked the question, can a post-tzimtzum reality experience a pre-tzimtzum consciousness, or vice versa, post-tzimtzum consciousness experience a pre-tzimtzum reality? That all began with the Torah of the Magid that wondered the same question. What he wondered, the Rebbe Rashab wondered, how can you can have El Gila Elikus and Atzilus, but how can from Atzilus, how can it come into Biy'a after the Parsa, after the partition? Which is essentially what we're discussing here, because the partition is not an end in itself. It's meant to regulate the flow, like we learned before, tzimtzum b'shvil hagilui, in order for Biy'a to be able to receive. And then now in the world of Biy'a, through our Ma'aseh Tachtenim, we can slowly now retrace the steps and the stepping stones all the way back up to Malchus and higher, as we'll learn and we'll discuss further. Okay. Any question before I continue?
I have a question, Rabbi, but it may not be particularly relevant here. So just let me know. What did
I will let you know.
What did we apprehend at Sinai? Which level did we apprehend? Did we apprehend Atzmus, or, I mean...
When you say the word Atzmus is a very broad word, everybody has a different meaning of it. What do you mean by Atzmus? Why don't you say it in simple English? What's Atzmus in your mind?
Atzmus is the essence, essential.
Yeah, but anything that's not revealed, I mean, can be considered something higher than we are. Did we experience something higher than usual and routine? Yes. You ask me what level?
Yes.
So chapter 36 in Tanya says that it's a high level of divine revelation, and similar, a taste of what will be when Mashiach comes, when the divine revelation will completely saturate existence. The level, you could describe it many ways. You could describe a taste of before the Tzimtzum. You could describe the level of Atzilus. Why is it relevant? If you can tell me, then it's just a matter of how you understand the levels that are beyond the regular structure.
Right. I'm saying, because you are describing how we are able to interact on this particular level. I'm just thinking, we're learning about the mechanism. So, but it's almost like at
Matan Torah was not part of the mechanism. Matan Torah was a revelation from above.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
But after Matan Torah is now the work. In this context, you can say Matan Torah is the revelation of Atzilus.
Okay.
Okay. And now our work is to integrate that.
Thank you. Yes, that's helpful. Thanks.
I would have thought that the level was that we experienced at Montorah Anoichi was this level that we've been learning before, about all the way much higher before the Tzimtzum, all the way up to Helam Atzmi and that level, and that somehow the resistance.
It would have to say that somewhere. If you can find a source that by Matan Torah is the Gili of the Helam Atzmi, then we can look at that. It does speak about Moshe Nigish al Arafel when Moshe approached the cloud, so it talks about the Helam levels and so on. But Matan Torah can be explained in many different ways. Even Anoichi, what level is Anoichi exactly? I'm just very careful when you throw out words, Etzem and Atzmus, because like I said, in Torah Shalom, he says when you say Atzmus, you usually mean Etzem Ha'or. You're not talking about Atzmus. So we're talking about Bilti Mitzias Nimtza, the Atzmus that we talked about, that's completely beyond everything. We're talking about Etzem Ha'or. So if I just don't want to use words unless it says in a mimer somewhere that particular word, then I'll be more than delighted to explain it. But when we use these words, to me, it comes down to it's higher than the regular routine levels of Giluyim. Obviously, Matan Torah is a high level of revelation. And like I said, in Tanya, he says that it's a taste of me'ain ze'ahoye ba'eis matan teira, me'ain of what will be in the future, when it'll be nigla kvei davai. When it says Mashiach will come and the divine presence will be completely manifest in existence, what level of divine presence? You ever think about that? Is it Mamala Kalalman? Is it Seviv Kalalman? Is it Atzmus? Is it relevant? Is it relative to the person? Each of us, like it says, Kulim Yedu Esi, will all know Esi, God, Miktana Vagdelam, from young to old, from the young to the older. So you see right there that you can have two different experiences of Esi, of Atzmus, based on where you are at. So this needs to be always qualified when you address these things, or else it becomes an abstract discussion. As I said, it always comes down to our avodah, where you stand in relation to these ideas. You know, for someone who's just beginning to learn Chassidus, Atzmus could simply mean etzem of Elam Asiyah Haruchnis is a lot higher than Asiyah Gashmis. You know, what means that, we speak about Neshama. We are material human beings. As soon as you have a spiritual experience, is that an atzmistic experience? So that's why I would always push anyone who's addressing that, spell it out. Tell me what you're addressing. Which level of the divine you want to talk about? Like I said, the Alter Rebbe, when he couldn't even say the word Atzilus. We talk about Lifnei Tzimtzum like it's just an easy thing to get to. The Alter Rebbe trembled and literally could not say the word Atzilus. So what does that tell you? How could he even speak about Atzmus and Erein Sof before the Tzimtzum if you can't even say Atzilus? Now for us, I know we don't have that problem, because for us it's words. It's like lip service. And it's all, Atzmus, Erein Sof before the Tzimtzum, Etzema, Echad, Yachid, Kadmin, Echad, Yachid, all these levels. But that's why I always say you have to personalize it and see where it stands. If someone really appreciated what Atzmus is, they wouldn't be able to just sit here and talk about it. You'd be not just trembling, you probably couldn't even express it, because you'd be so consumed with a level that's completely beyond yourself. So the fact is, when we speak about these things, that alone tells you that it's far, far more into Kalim. It's not even Malchus into Biy'a, it's Malchus of Asiyah into Biy'a, Gashmis, and Chumris. So you have to imagine, that's where we have to be realistic when we talk about all these levels. Where do you stand in that experience? And this is not meant to belittle or knock anyone, including myself. It's just meant to be realistic of where you are. Where do you really stand in the context of your own spiritual awareness?
So if our generation is so
So
low,
for example, just one more second, for example, someone with an ego who is insulted by other people, who has vanity and other things like that, tell me, what experience of Malchus or what experience of Atzilus are they having in their lives? So I understand there are moments that we all have a Yesodus, an awakening where we're egoless. But generally speaking, in any given moment, our egos are fragile, and every one of us has a certain measure of vanity and so on. So if you want to talk on that level, tell me, where's Elikus fit into your life? Now, this is not Musar. I'm not trying to, God forbid, reprimand or rebuke anyone. I'm talking to myself just as I talk to you. But this is that when you learn Chassidus, you have to always be aware of that. It's not, even though the Rebbe Rashab is spoiling us, so to speak, by talking about all these levels, because we can access them, all relative to each one of us, but we also have to, like the Alter Rebbe says, that you have to know how small you are and how great you can become. So we're learning here how great we can become. We also have to know how small we are. Not in any way to diminish us. We're not talking about to self-denigrating. God forbid. It's like the Friedrich Rebbe says, just like a person has to know their own faults, they also have to know their own strengths. So we need both. Just a matter of context and perspective. Go ahead. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that in our generation,
sometimes we need a little wake-up call. Yeah.
In our generation, Ichvus the Mashiach, with the lowest levels, the heel, compared to especially like Dora Dea and so on, and even in the low levels of the Chassidim of old, like you said, Alter Rebbe, which Ram couldn't even say Atzilus. So the question is begged: why did the Rebbe Rashab reveal to us these incredible levels, Lifnei Tzimtzum, or in so Lifnei Tzimtzum, Esrog Spheres Ganuzos, all the way Etzema, why did he reveal it to us if we're incapable of experiencing it? But
I didn't say we're incapable, by the way. I said we are capable, but we have to also know where we stand.
Okay, well,
and
you would have to be inside. I don't know. It's to have to
no,
have
I
that
don't
level
agree.
of-
I don't agree.
You don't
Let me
agree?
ask you something. You saying Shema every day.
Mhm.
Before we get to Ayin Beis,
Yes.
every Jew says all three. You could ask the same question. Halavai, I have a haftas Hashem b'chlal, let alone b'chol levavcha, let alone b'chol nafshecha, let alone b'chol meidecha. So why do we say that?
Well, after
Loving God is not an easy thing. Or in the morning, we say Neshama shenasata bi tahirahi, ata barasa, ata yitzata, ata nefachta bi, ata meshamra b'kirbi. Why are we talking about tahirahi? We barely are able to have the lower level. The answer is because relative to each one of us, everybody can reach these levels. Relative. You're not going to reach the tahirihi of someone that's on a far higher level in Avodah. Correct. But the Rebbe Rashab is writing a universal chassidus for everybody. For those that are very high levels, and there are people who are on lower levels. But everybody relative to them can find these levels. That's the critical point that I've always made. That's called applying chassidus to your life. That whatever level you learn, you can achieve it relative to you. The Alter Rebbe in Perek Mem Beis in Tanya says, classic statement. Moshe Rabbeinu in the pasuk says, "U'ma Hashem lekecha sholim imach." What is God already asking of you? All He's asking of you is a very simple thing. Moshe says, "Liyiras Hashem lekecha," to revere Him and to have awe and respect for Him. Ma Hashem lekecha sholim. That Moshe says that. It's a pasuk in the Torah. What is God already asking of you? He's not asking much. Says the Gemara in Brachas, "V'chi yira milse zutrusi." Is yira, awe and reverence of God, such a small thing that Moshe just dismisses it and says, "What's He already asking of you?" It's like someone would say to you, "What's the big thing?" Pick up the tissue from the floor. What's the big thing? So is it such a milse zutrusi? The Gemara asked that question, and the Gemara answers, "Yeah, can't." The Gabba Moshe, Milsa Zutrasi. For Moshe, it's a small thing. So the Alter Rebbe asks a Gavaldic question. But Moshe is speaking to the Jews. He's not speaking to himself. For himself, yes, Yiras Hashem is not a big thing. That's Moshe. There's one Moshe Rabbeinu. He's speaking to the Jews. And the answer is because every Jew has a Moshe within him. So based on the Moshe within you, it's a Milsa Zutrasa. But everyone understands that the Moshe within you is not Moshe Rabbeinu that led the Jews out of Mitzrayim and gave them and brought the Torah, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai. It means there's a me'ain. There's like in a microcosm, a Moshe within you. There's the regular you, and then there's a Moshe within you. It's your potential in your neshama. Chelik elikam mal mamish, however you explain it. So you have it, now you have to access it. So someone's going to access it, then they'll say, you know what, I'm just like Moshe Rabbeinu. No. That doesn't make you into Moshe Rabbeinu. It means that, like Rab Zusha said, he was crying in a corner. Why are you crying? He says, I'm not crying because they're going to ask me why I wasn't like Avram Avinu or like Yitzchak or Yaakov or like the Rebbe or so on. I'm crying because they're going to ask me why I wasn't like Zusha. All we can be asked for, the only thing that can be requested and required from us is to be ourselves. What the Torah Chassidus is teaching you that you have potential far more than you can imagine. So everything we're learning here, you have within you. Now the question is to define it. So you have to, it's not one extreme or the other. When I said being realistic before, I didn't say because we're not capable of this, but it's all relative. That magical moment in your life where you could say, I had the ultimate epiphany or the ultimate Iserus awakening and a Yom Kippur or a Tshuva or a moment of existential, awe of something, you can say that moment you had a certain experience of a higher level of the divine energies within you. What level? I can't answer that without knowing the other levels that you have within you. But it's all about trying to train us and prime us to think in terms of levels of divine consciousness. That's what all this is about. Whether it's the level of Asiya or Yetzirah or Bria or Atzilus or Malchus, And that's what we need to, how we apply this to our lives. That is where I always say you need a mashpia, a rav, where you could sit down and say, I just learned in Chassidus that there's esespheres sagnuzis. And then I learned there's higher than that, there's shame. And higher than that, yechelis. And higher than that, atzmus. And lower than that, at Tzimtzum, and the Kav, and Atzilus and Biy'a, and all this that we're learning here. Help me find these levels within me. That's the work, the homework that each of us has to do. That's already the avodah of implementing this. So I can give examples for it, and that's when we talk more of the applied aspects of all of this. But that's the point, is that all of this exists within us. As elam nasim belibam, elam katan zeh adam. Human beings are a microcosm of the entire universe, so all the cosmos are there right within you. And chayiv adam lemer, every one of us is responsible to say, b'shvili nivra elam, the whole world was created for me. Not arrogance, but responsibility, because the whole world is waiting for you to do your avodah relative to you, from Moida Ani, through the Brichas HaShachar, through Psukkah de Zimra, Brichas Yetzer, Brichas Krishma, Brichas Yetzer, Shema, Shemoneh Esrei. And it's meant to be a journey that you take on a daily basis from one level to the next. And Rebbe Rashab is giving us the map and the stepping stones and the ladder, whatever you want to call it. Like they say, the Baal Shem Tov taught that every Jew can serve God. He gave us the ladder. And the Alter Rebbe taught how to climb the ladder. That's an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe. He brings it in the Sichos. So we have here the ladder, and we're being taught how to climb the ladder. And each of us has to apply that ladder to our personal lives. And it's one person is not the other. We don't have to be the same. As a matter of fact, we shouldn't be the same. Each of us is different and unique. And whenever you do what your thing, one of the Maimer HaMakbil L'Shevis, actually, he says, B'chol Moedecha, he says, your Moed. And when you do your Moed, you actually touch B'li Gvul Moed L'mayla. Even though your Moed is very different than someone else's Moed. You know, for a person who can give $1 million to charity, and they give less than that, when a person can only give $1, if the person gives $1 and $2, they push themselves a moedecha that a person that's $1 million did not, even though $1 million is more in quantity, but not the qualitative shift, as he explains in chapter 15 in Tanya. Anyway, I hope that helped. Not the first time I've discussed this, but doesn't hurt to remind ourselves again and again of this so-called avodah dika dimension to the whole picture that we're learning here.
In this regards, can I ask one simple question? You said Kelly supposed to be expanded. Does it supposed to be through pain, or it doesn't need to be going? Our expansion required something challenging and painful, or it might be more.
It doesn't have to be pain. We can bring our own pain upon ourselves, not pain in a negative way, by pushing ourselves. When you exert yourself through your pushing yourself to achieve more, then there's no reason that pain has to come to remind you. Pain is a last resort that usually wakes people up because they hit rock bottom type of thing, you know. But it doesn't have to be through pain. It can be through effort, through commitment, through responsibility, through dedication.
In case if you have mashpia, but in case if you are going, so to say, blindly on the way without.
If you don't have an outside objective person, it's going to be difficult for you to be honest and also accountable. You know, the Rebbe speaks about the 30 days before your Shvat, which we're now in that period, to have a mashpia that you can report to every 10 days, what commitments you've made, where you stand. It's like accountability. It's essentially like an accountant that you have to answer to. We all know when you don't have that, you know, you don't have the pressure of accountability or deadlines.
That's answered my question. So it might be with a high volume boost or regular step by step. I understand.
It's a combination of everything, all in one. Some things are step by step. Sometimes you take a leap,
leap.
know,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Look, the Rambam says, based on the Gemara, in the end of Hilchos Shuvah, he says, "La'elam yasik adam b'teira mitzvah shalei l'shma, shemetech shalei l'shma ba l'shma." That a person should always, he says the word always begin their service of God, Torah mitzvahs, with ulterior motives. Shalei l'shma, either because you're going to benefit from it physically, or benefit from it spiritually, or it makes you feel good, or you feel obligated, or you feel part of community. You know, people give charity. Charity is often done for very ulterior motives. They get honored, respect, a name, prominent. And when it comes to tzedakah, it says, that's fine. Even if you do it to test God, it's also fine. Because bottom line is you've helped somebody else. But we also understand that the highest level of avodah is when you do it lishma, for the cause itself. Says the Rambam that only Avram Oyavi, says Avram, my beloved, he says, was Eises emes mipnei shu emes. He followed the truth because it was true, not because he gained something from it. So what do you see from this? La'elam, that's the human nature. You tell a child, we'll give you a toy, we'll give you a candy, we'll take you on a trip if you do well in school today. That's not a negative thing, because that's what the child understands. The child does not yet understand the value of study on its own, of Torah on its own, or the mitzvah on its own. So you say, we'll show you by giving you something that you do appreciate, and we associate that with Torah, so the child on its terms starts understanding that Torah is a valuable thing. So they come to a point where they can start appreciating it for its own, on its own merit. This is common among all of us, no matter what age you are. So it may not be physical pleasure, it could be spiritual pleasure, it could feel good. Learning Chassidus, for example, is very geschmack. Your animal soul could enjoy it, it's stimulating, it's spiritual, it's transcendent, it explains things. Perfectly fine, there's nothing wrong with that. We actually learned earlier, if you remember, that we start studying Torah, Mikara, the expression was, just going back exactly here, where was it? Initially, I'm reading on page 1405. Mikara ki ovid inish adaita the nafshe ovid. When a person begins service, they do it for their own interest. Adaita means for them. I studied Torah, it makes my soul connected to God. Then, l'kasha nefriya, that's in the neshama as is down below. Then he says, then you come to a level where l'shma, l'shem atayri, you're doing it for Torah, you're doing it for Hashem. But it's perfectly fine. This is the way, the process of how things work. This is called being realistic. That you understand. That's what Malchus understands. Malchus is diminishing the light on our terms. So we can now do it in ways that we can relate to. And our Ma'aser Tachtenim, yes, we have someone to talk to. Who is that? Malchus. That's the engagement with the shinui and the change, that our actions have direct impact. Higher levels are far more removed, like Leishanisi, like it. Doesn't mean they don't exist, doesn't mean they're not benefiting from it, but it's not a direct relationship, as we're going to learn now. So I'll continue reading the next paragraph. He says, Omnam, Liya is the B'chinas Malchus, he be'erech hanevroyim. However, being that Malchus, as we just discussed, is commensurate to and relates to the creations, ub'chinas mokalehem, and it's a state of being called a source to them, you know, an identifiable source, because Malchus is relating to existence. Al-kein negeish ma'aser tachtenim. That's why ma'aser tachtenim, the actions below our efforts, is negeia there. Because Malchus is meant to engage with us. So it's negeia. Shehi misapeches lefum uvdihun de bnei nasha. That's the language of the Zohar. It turns, misapeches, like the wheel, lefum uvdihun, according to the actions of human beings below. Bnei nasha is bnei Adam. That's why Malchus is negeia ma'aser tachtenim and Malchus. Higher than Malchus, as we said, it's not negate, but we'll soon learn what happens there. Right now he's talking about Malchus. Ukamoi, and this explains a very bizarre statement at the end of Parshas Bereishis, when the human beings were sinning and transgressing. What does it say? It didn't just say God said, you're self-destructive and the time has come to destroy the world. God speaks about himself. Ukamoi vayisatzev Hashem elibei. God was literally, vayisatzev means atzev. He was depressed. He had regrets in his heart for creating such a world. He saw the sins, saw the transgressions, the injustices, and it was horrible. The world was filled, as the next parsha, Mal Oretz Chamas, was filled with crime. He created a world that should be refined, a world that we build a dira b'tachtenim, a home, a garden. So starting with the Chet Tzadas, it only got worse and worse, to the point that people were literally corrupt, filled with crime. So God looks at the world that he created, and the Torah tells us that he felt sad. Obviously, we have to avoid any anthropomorphism. It's metaphorical, but still that expression is used. It doesn't just say God said, you're messed up, and what do I need this world for? It takes it personally. How could you say such a thing on Hashem, even as a metaphor? So he says, next page, 1432. That's the level of Malchus that's called the heart. So they say that's of El Libay. Where's God's heart? That's Malchus. So we see clearly that Malchus is going through a shift. Upamim, that's the negative side. What about the positive side? Upamim amru. At other times it says, va'anpa the hidden, that its face is illuminated. Vayisatzev is a sad face, is a sad heart, I should say. Then sometimes it said vampoi, that's vampoi is in Aramaic face, ponim. Nehidin is oir. Ponim me'iris. Its face sometimes shines. P'chinas pnei ha-malchus, which is again referring to the face of Malchus. She b'chinas gvanin nehidin. That's in a state of illuminated colors. It's shining bright with many colors. You may remember the Shoshana he spoke about earlier. Shoshana from the word shinui. That's Malchus. Bottom of page 14. Where was it? Right here, yeah. Bottom of page 1428. She Malchus says shinui, Shoshana, and a Shoshana changes colors. Close to the bottom, he says, Meshana Gavno, Zamna Latovna. Yeah. So you see from this, that could be a face that's like a saddened face or a saddened heart, or it could be a bright, illuminated face. Ukamoy, like where do we see that? In the beginning of creation, God looked at the world. He looked at light, the light that he created in day one, and he saw it was good. What does good mean? Good means is a good feeling, a good experience. What it says Chazal, what did he see that was good? Elu ma'asein shel tzaddikim. It's referring to the actions of tzaddikim, which God made God feel good about it. Ve'elikim, you say vayar elikim, again is referring to Malchus. Elikim b'chinas Malchus kaneda. And Malchus, and Elikim is Malchus. So essentially what he's doing here is explaining all the verses that describe God, so-called in personal terms, even though in Dibra Teira B'Lashon B'nei Adam, obviously, God speaks in the language of man, but we also know there are levels of God that don't even speak in the language of man, that are beyond anything human. So what do we mean by all this? So it means we're referring to the level of Malchus primarily, where these type of expressions, you can refer to God in terms like emotional experiences, if you wish. The Yisatzev, an illuminated face, now good. V'hainu, and this is what it means. That commensurate according to our maisim, our actions below, kain misapeches b'chinas hamalchus. So Malchus turns. Okay, now he's going to enter a new zone. And according to this is also how Malchus receives from higher levels. I'm thinking of stopping right here because the next section, he's going to start talking about that once Malchus is affected, so to speak, by our actions, but remember, Malchus receives its energy from higher levels. So what does that mean? So he's going to explain just a simple example. If God is smiling, that's in Malchus. But once he's smiling, then that opens up channels of higher levels to shine through Malchus. So essentially what happens in Malchus will in turn open up doors to higher levels. And the same thing, the opposite. When Malchus is saddened, so to speak, the doors close, those channels close. So in a sense, you can say higher levels than Malchus. I'm just giving you an introduction to where we're going. Higher levels of Malchus are intact within them, and they're not affected by anything. But that doesn't mean that Malchus cannot access them or not access them. So essentially, it's like saying a person, like you could have someone you love deeply, but then you hurt them. The love is still there, but that doesn't mean that it's flowing to you because the doors have been closed in a sense. So the Ayurveda, therefore, is affected whether Malchus will have a door open to the higher levels or a door closed. That's briefly what he's going to be explaining regarding the higher levels. But we'll learn that inside. We'll wait for the next class for that. I think stopping here would be the right place to stop because it's going to get a little more dense. Okay. Any more questions on this, what we've just learned?
You might not want to answer this, but regarding Malchus and the Rambam, you know how he says that in the time of Mashiach, the only difference will be Shibud Malchus. I always wonder if it has something to do with not the kingships that we see down here, but with what we're talking about Malchus.
Absolutely not, because Shibud Malchus is talking about being subjugated to foreign nations.
Can we be
This is not what he's
subjugated
talking
to?
about at all. Here's talking about Malchus of Elikus, Malchus Lamaila. There it says that Shmuel says the difference between Mashiach and today is only difference because today we are subjugated to foreign nations, and Mashiach comes, we'll be freed from them. So I would not connect that here at all.
That we subjugate the Malchus.
No, we are subjugated to foreign nations.
I understand the simple understanding, but I see it as
okay. Beyond that, then it's another discussion. It has nothing to do with Ayin Beis.
This is just amazing. I just want to say, because he's basically telling us here that we can affect the channel of energy by our actions, that the flow is coming based on what we do. We have some control here.
Absolutely. As we're going to learn soon as Zohar, that the Rebbe brings sometimes when people write to the Rebbe that they're depressed, the Rebbe sometimes cites a Zohar that says when you're depressed below, you cause depression above. It's like a mirror image. When you smile to the mirror, you get a smile in return. When you have a sour face, you get a sour face in return. It's actually, this week is Chavdala Tevis, the 24th of Tevis, Friday, which is the Alter Rebbe's Yartzeit. So that night when he passed away in Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel, 1812, was Saturday night. So it says exactly that Tzemach Tzedek writes in a letter that night they saw already that Alter Rebbe was waning, it was not good. So Tzemach Tzedek, when he davened Ma'ariv, he led the Ma'ariv service, and Shabbos ended, and he was very sad. The Alter Rebbe called him over afterwards and said to him, I heard from my Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich, Kemara Pnei Adam Lamayla, that the face you show below is the face that's reflected from above. So if you show a simcha face, you get simcha from above. If you don't, you get the opposite. That was probably the last thing the Alter Rebbe said. And Tzemach Tzedek has a whole letter, a 2-3 page, very psychological letter about that your attitude creates your destiny. Very somewhat quite reminiscent when we learned this, that idea. Like the trach gut wird sein gut is not just a cliche. It means when you think good, you generate good energy. And you see it also with people. You tell me, if you feel depressed and you show a depressed face, how many people want to hang around with you? When you're happy, you show happiness. Now we have to discuss what happens if a person is not happy, they just show off. We're not talking about fake face. We're not talking about faking it, but sometimes you fake it till you make it as well. There's that aspect, but it's a bigger discussion, but there is an aspect to what you project, that's what comes back in return.
Mm-hmm. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov said, always be joyful, right?
Yeah. Well, how to become joyful is not just that you want joy in return, but it's also recognizing that there are many things to celebrate.
Yeah.
But we write our own scripts very often. Look, confident people breed confidence in others, right? And insecure people usually breed insecurity in others. That's why you want a commander-in-chief, a leader that is optimistic, forward-thinking, and he cultivates and he engenders what does he do? He stimulates confidence and courage. Courage, that's what courage does. Okay, we'll stop here, close to the top of page 1432.